policy where we're going to have to do a better job. I think that over the last 2 years, we have made a series of very tough decisions, but decisions that were right in terms of moving the country forward in an emergency situation where we had the risk of slipping into a second Great Depression. But what is absolutely true is that with all that stuff coming at folks fast and furious, a recovery package, what we had to do with respect to the banks, what we had to do with respect to the auto companies, I think people started looking at all this, and it felt as if government was getting much more intrusive into people's lives than they were accustomed to. Now, the reason was it was an emergency situation, but I think it's understandable that folks said to themselves, maybe this is the agenda as opposed to a response to an emergency. And that's something that I think, everybody in the White House understood was a danger. We thought it was necessary, but I'm sympathetic to folks who looked at it and said, this is looking like potential overreach. In addition, there are a bunch of price tags that went with that. And so even though these were emergency situations, people rightly said, gosh, we already have all this debt. We already have these big deficits. This is potentially going to compound it. And at what point are we going to get back to a situation where we're doing what families all around the country do, which is make sure that if you spend something, you know how to pay for it, as opposed to racking up the credit card for the next generation. And I think that the other thing that happened is that, when I won election in 2008, one of the reasons I think that people were excited about the campaign was the prospect that we would change how business is done in Washington. And we were in such a hurry to get things done that we didn't change how things got done. And I think that frustrated people. I'm a strong believer that the earmarking process in Congress isn't what the American people really want to see when it comes to making tough decisions about how taxpayer dollars are spent. And I, in the rush to get things done, had to sign a bunch of bills that had earmarks in them, which was contrary to what I had talked about. And I think, folks look at that and they said, gosh, this feels like the same partisan squabbling. This seems like the same ways of doing business as happened before. And so, one of the things that I've got to take responsibility for is not having moved enough on those fronts. And I think there is an opportunity to move forward on some of those issues. My understanding is Eric Cantor today said that he wanted to see a moratorium on earmarks continuing. That's something I think we can work on together.
But you still resist the notion that voters rejected the policy choices you made?
Well, Savannah, I think that what I think is absolutely true is voters are not satisfied with the outcomes. I mean, if right now we had 5% unemployment instead of 9.6% unemployment, then people would have more confidence in those policy choices. The fact is that, for most folks, proof of whether they work or not is, has the economy gotten back to where it needs to be? And it hasn't. And so my job is to make sure that I'm looking at all ideas that are on the table. When it comes to job creation, if Republicans have good ideas for job growth that can drive down the unemployment rate, and we haven't thought of them, we haven't looked at them, but we think they have a chance of working, we want to try some. So on the policy front, I think the most important thing is to say that we're not going to rule out ideas because they're Democrat or Republican. We want to just see what works. And ultimately, I'll be judged as president as to the bottom line, results. Mike Emanuel.
you're well aware, obviously, a lot of Republicans ran against your health care law. Some have called for repealing the law. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, sir, if you believe that health care reform that you work so hard on is in danger at this point, and whether there's a threat as a result of this election.
Well, I know that there's some Republican candidates who won last night who feel very strongly about it. I'm sure that this will be an issue that comes up in discussions with the Republican leadership. As I said before, though, I think we'd be misreading the election if we thought that the American people want to see us for the next 2 years relitigate arguments that we had over the last 2 years. With respect to the health care law generally, and this may go to some of the questions that Savannah was raising. You know, when I talk to a woman from New Hampshire who doesn't have to mortgage her house because she got cancer and is seeking treatment, but now is able to get health insurance. When I talk to parents who are relieved that their child with a pre-existing condition can now stay on their policy until they're 26 years old and give them a time to transition to find a job that will give them health insurance, or the small businesses that are now taking advantage of the tax credits that are provided, then I say to myself, this was the right thing to do. Now, if the Republicans have ideas for how to improve our health care system, if they want to suggest modifications that would deliver faster and more effective reform to a health care system that has been wildly expensive for too many families and businesses, and certainly for our federal government, I'm happy to consider some of those ideas. For example, I know one of the things that's come up is that the 1099 provision in the health care bill appears to be too burdensome for small businesses. It just involves too much paperwork, too much filing. It's probably counterproductive. It was designed to make sure that revenue was raised to help pay for some of the other provisions, but if it ends up just being so much trouble that small businesses find it difficult to manage, that's something that we should take a look at. So there are going to be examples where I think we can tweak and make improvements on the progress that we've made. That's true for any significant piece of legislation. But I don't think that if you ask the American people, should we stop trying to close the donut hole that will help senior citizens get prescription drugs? Should we go back to a situation where people with pre-existing conditions can't get health insurance? Should we allow insurance companies to drop your coverage when you get sick, even though you've been paying premiums? I don't think that you'd have a strong vote for people saying, those are provisions I want to eliminate.
According to the exit poll, sir, about 1 out of 2 voters apparently said that they would like to either see it overturned or repealed. Are you concerned that that may embolden those who are from the other party, perhaps?
Well, it also means 1 out of 2 voters think it was the right thing to do. And obviously this is an issue that has been contentious. But as I said, I think what's going to be useful is for us to go through, the issues that Republicans have issues on. Not sort of talking generally, but let's talk specifics. Is this particular provision, when it comes to pre-existing conditions, is this something you're for or you're against? Helping seniors get their prescription drugs, does that make sense or not? If we take that approach, which is different from campaigning, I mean, this is now governing, then I think that we can continue to make some progress and find some common ground. Okay, Chip Reed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Republicans say more than anything else what this election was about was spending, and they say it will be when hell freezes over, that they will accept anything remotely like a stimulus bill or any kind of the proposals you have out there to stimulate job growth through spending. Do you accept the fact that any kind of spending to create jobs is dead at this point? And if so, what else can government do to create jobs, which is the #1 issue?
Well, I think this is going to be an important question for Democrats and Republicans. I think the American people are absolutely concerned about spending and debt and deficits. And I'm going to have a deficit commission that is putting forward its ideas. It's a bipartisan group that includes Republican and Democratic members of Congress. Hopefully, they were able to arrive at some consensus on some areas where we can eliminate programs that don't work, cut back on government spending that is inefficient, can streamline government, but isn't cutting into the core investments that are going to make sure that we are a competitive economy that is growing and providing opportunity for years to come. So, you know, the question I think that my Republican friends and me and Democratic leaders are going to have to answer is, what are our priorities? What do we care about? And that's going to be a tough debate because there are some tough choices here. We already had a big deficit that I inherited, and that has been made worse because of the recession. As we bring it down, I want to make sure that we're not cutting into education that is going to help define whether or not we can compete around the world. I don't think we should be cutting back on research and development because if we can develop new technologies in areas like clean energy, that could make all the difference in terms of job creation here at home. I think the proposal that I've put forward with respect to infrastructure is one that historically we've had bipartisan agreement about. And we should be able to agree now that it makes no sense for China to have better rail systems than us and Singapore having better airports than us. And we just learned that China now has the fastest supercomputer on Earth. That used to be us. They're making investments because they know those investments will pay off over the long term. And so in these budget discussions, the key is to be able to distinguish between stuff that isn't adding to our growth, isn't an investment in our future, and those things that are absolutely necessary for us to be able to increase job growth in the future as well. Now, the single most important thing I think we need to do economically, and this is something that has to be done during the lame duck session, is making sure that taxes don't go up on middle-class families next year. And so we've got some work to do on that front to make sure that families not only are seeing a higher tax burden, which will automatically happen if Congress doesn't act, but also making sure that business provisions that historically we have extended each year, that, for example, provide tax breaks for companies that are investing here in the United States in research and development, that those are extended. I think it makes sense for us to extend unemployment insurance because there's still a lot of folks out there hurting. So there's some things that we can do right now that will help sustain the recovery and advance it, even as we're also sitting down and figuring out, okay, over the next several years, what kinds of budget cuts can we make that are intelligent, that are smart, that won't be undermining our recovery, but in fact will be encouraging job growth.
Most of those things that you just called investments, they call wasteful spending, and they say it's dead on arrival. It sounds like without their support, you can't get any of it through.
Well, what is absolutely true is that if without any Republican support on anything, then it's going to be hard to get things done. But I'm not going to anticipate that they're not going to support anything. I think that part of the message sent to Republicans was we want to see stronger job growth in this country. And if there are good ideas about putting people to work that traditionally have garnered Republican support and that don't add to the deficit, then my hope is and expectation is that that's something they're willing to have a serious conversation about. When it comes to, for example, the proposal we put forward to accelerate depreciation for business, so that if they're building a plant or investing in new equipment next year, that they can take a complete write-off next year, get a huge tax break next year, and that would then encourage a lot of businesses to get off the sidelines. I mean, that's not historically considered a liberal idea. That's actually an idea that business groups and Republicans, I think, have supported for a very long time. So, again, the question is going to be, do we all come to the table with an open mind and say to ourselves, what do we think is actually going to make a difference for the American people? That's how we're going to be judged over the next couple of years.